Dr. Stephen Chu, here to testify on the new direction of the energy research at the Department of Energy. As a preview to the more detailed budget proposal we will see from the administration in April, this hearing provides an opportunity for Secretary Chu to discuss the administration's priorities for energy research and development. The department has a critical task ahead in the energy and climate research and technology development. And make no mistake, at this time, gas prices may be low, and the effects of climate change may not be apparent to everyone, but this will not last. We must take action now to become a cleaner, more efficient energy economy. To do this, we must diversify our sources of energy by expanding the use of renewable energy and by using fossil fuels more cleanly and efficiently. And I believe that nuclear energy will also be a part of this equation, but I have concerns about the magnitude or the management of waste. And Dr. Chu, this committee stands ready to work with you to develop the appropriate R&D path for that disposal concern. As a key member of the National Academy's Gathering Storm Panel, Dr. Chu was intimately involved in laying the groundwork for the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, or ARPA-E. And as you know, this passed by an overwhelming bipartisan support out of this committee. And this committee will continue to work with the Secretary to ensure its success. I look forward to hearing about the status of the ARPA-E startup. The $39 billion allocated to DOE and the Recovery Act funds a wide range of activities, spanning the innovation spectrum from basic research to supporting the market for new energy technologies. It also presents a historic opportunity to put people to work building a more sustainable future for the country. However, when it comes to taxpayer money, we must work together to ensure these funds are spent wisely. In this hearing, we will have only a few brief opportunities to cover a wide range of issues, but I consider this the beginning of a productive partnership with Secretary Chu. And Dr. Chu, I look forward to your testimony, and I thank you for appearing before the committee this morning. And now the chairman recognizes Mr. Hall for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, I do thank you for holding this hearing today, and I'd like to extend my welcome to Secretary Chu. It's good to have you here, and I look forward to working with you as we continue to tackle our energy challenges, and there are quite a few of them. I'm pleased to see the level of commitment in the President's budget supporting research and development in the important fields of renewable energy and basic energy. As we all know, renewable energy is going to be an important and necessary part of the energy portfolio as we go forward with the dual goals of energy independence and clean environment. I'm also pleased that the President's budget contained a boost toward developing low-carbon coal technologies. I've always been supportive of using this very abundant domestic resource for providing our country's energy needs. With widespread commercial use of carbon capture and sequestration technology, our country can hopefully have the option of replacing imports of oil and gas with coal-to-liquids fuels and methane gas from coal. What I haven't seen or heard is what the plans are for oil and gas research and development going forward. I believe in all of the above, quote and unquote, answered our energy problems, and that includes using domestic sources of oil and natural gas. Research and development in these fields does not benefit the major oil companies, but it does benefit the small independent oil and gas producers who should be helped in their efforts to bring our domestic supplies to the market rather than penalized at every step. I'm very disappointed that the President recommended that the ultra-deepwater and unconventional natural gas and other petroleum research program be repealed. The prior administration made this recommendation, as well as Congress, and Congress has repeatedly said to the President and to the prior administration, you're wrong, and we funded this valuable program anyway. I like George Bush, and I flew west with him to sign the bill that included this provision in it, and usually they turn and hand a pencil to someone. All he said was, Ralph Hall's with me because he just wanted some coffee from Air Force One. What he didn't know was I had 5 of his cups in my briefcase at that time. But the Ultra Deep program is paid for by the federal lease royalties, rents, and bonuses, paid by oil and gas companies, not taxpayers. and it'll make the government more money in the long run, as resulting research and development will lead to increased royalties, rents, and bonuses paid by oil and gas companies. And, Mr. Chairman, in order to stress the importance of this issue, I would ask to include this document, highlights from RIPSA, a project portfolio, in the record.
With no objection, this will be made part of the record.
Thank you. I'll hand it to him. And I'll have more to say about this during the question and answer, but I just want to urge the Secretary and President Obama to reconsider their position on this program. I'm also interested in hearing about the administration's decision to move away from the idea of storing spent nuclear fuel at the Yucca Mountain Repository in Nevada, and how that decision will or will not affect the current applications for new plants and the future of nuclear energy in our country. Nuclear energy is, of course, also part of the, quote, all of the above, unquote, energy solution, and should be considered a powerhouse in our energy arsenal. Out of all of the emissions-free options, it produces the most energy and is the most reliable, and I urge the Secretary to make sure it remains a part of this mix. And I look forward to working with you and look forward to your testimony and the ensuing discussion on a very important work that's being done by the Department of Energy, a department that I think is probably the #1 department to the future of this country and to this position that we're taking in trying to produce our own energy and not rely on nations that don't really trust us and that we could do without, and keep those billions of dollars within the confines of the 50 states. And with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, and I certainly agree with you. Dr. Chu, you'll find that our committee tries to work in collaboration. Most everything we get out of here is bipartisan. Most often is unanimous, and so we hope to be an asset for you in that regard. If there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. Dr. Chu, we normally ask our witnesses to limit their testimony to 5 minutes. However, since you're the only person on the panel and the star of the show, we don't want to limit you. We're interested in hearing your plans and how you want to take the Department of Energy into the future. And so at this time, please begin.
Okay. Thank you. Chairman Gordon, Ranking Member Hall, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to talk about the new directions for energy research and development at the Department of Energy. Today, we import roughly 60% of our oil, draining resources from our economy and leaving it vulnerable to supply disruptions. Much of that oil is controlled by regimes that don't share our values, weakening our security. Additionally, if we continue our current rates of greenhouse gas emissions, the consequences of our climate could be disastrous. In the near term, President Obama and this Congress have already taken a key step towards meeting these challenges by passing the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. This legislation will put Americans back to work while laying the groundwork for a clean energy economy. Getting this money into the economy quickly, carefully, and transparently is a top priority for me. I know that your constituent states, cities, and businesses are eager to move forward and are seeking more information on how to access this funding. I've met with many of them already, and we will have much more detail in the coming weeks. With that brief introduction, I would like to turn to a topic that's near and dear to my heart. How can we better nurture and harness science to solve our energy and climate change problems? I've spent most of my career in research labs as a student, a researcher, faculty member. I took the challenge of being Secretary of Energy in part for the chance to ensure the Department of Energy laboratories and our country's universities will generate ideas that will help us address our energy challenges. I also strongly believe that the key to our prosperity in the 21st century lies in our ability to nurture our intellectual capital in science and engineering. Our previous investments in science led to the birth of the semiconductor, computer, and biotechnology industries that have added greatly to our economic prosperity. Now we need similar breakthroughs on energy. We're already taking steps in the right direction, but we need to do more. First, we need to increase funding. As part of the President's plan to double federal investment in the basic sciences, the 2010 budget provides substantially increased support for the Office of Science, building on the $1.6 billion provided in the Recovery Act for the Department of Energy's basic sciences programs. We also need to refocus our scarce research dollars. In April, a more detailed FY10 budget will be transmitted to the Congress. This budget will improve energy research, development, and deployment at the DOE in several ways. First, we need to develop science and engineering talent. The FY210 budget supports graduate fellowship programs that will train students in energy-related fields. I will also seek to build on the DOE's existing research strengths by attracting and retaining the most talented scientists. The second area I want to discuss is the need to support transformational research. What do I mean by transformational technology? I mean technology is game-changing as opposed to merely incremental. For example, in the 1920s and 30s, when Bell Laboratories was focused on extending the life of vacuum tubes, another much smaller research program was started to investigate a completely new device based on a revolutionary new advance in the understanding of the microscopic world, quantum mechanics. The result of this transformational research was the transistor, which transformed communications, allowed the computer industry to blossom, and changed the world forever. DOE must strive to be the modern version of the old Bell Laboratories in energy research. Because the payoffs from research in transformational technologies are both higher risk and longer term, government investment is critical and appropriate. We are already funding this type of research in biofuels. As this committee knows, we have funded 3 bioenergy research centers, one at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, one led by the University of Wisconsin in Madison in collaboration with Michigan State University, and one led by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Each of these centers is targeting breakthroughs in biofuel technology development that will be needed to make abundant, affordable, low-carbon biofuels a reality. We need to do more transformational research in the DOE to bring a range of clean energy technologies to the point where the private sector can pick them up, including gasoline and diesel-like biofuels generated from lumber waste, crop waste, solid waste, and non-food crops. Automobile batteries that with 2 or 3 times the energy density that can survive 15 years of deep discharges. Photovoltaic solar energy that's 5 times cheaper than today's technology. Computer design tools for commercial and residential buildings that will enable reductions in energy consumption of up to 80% with investments that will pay for themselves in less than 10 years. And large-scale energy storage systems so that variable renewable energy resources such as wind or solar power can become baseload power generators. This is not a definitive list or hard set of technology goals, but it gives a sense of the type of technologies and benchmarks that I think we should be aiming for. We will need transformational research to attain these types of goals. To make it happen, we will need to re-energize our national labs as centers of great science and innovation. At the same time, we need to seek innovation wherever it can be found. The new Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, or ARPA-E, will open up research funding to the best minds in the country wherever they will be. ARPA-E will identify technologies with potential to become the next generation of revolutionary energy systems and products, while it will make a major impact on our twin problems of energy security and climate change. I want to thank this committee for your leadership in championing the creation of ARPA-E. ARPA-E will accomplish its mission by funding high-risk, high-payoff R&D performed by industry, academia, not-for-profits, national laboratories, and consortia. ARPA-E will bring the DARPA style of transformational R&D management to focus on energy problems and opportunities. I pledge to you that we will have this program up and running as soon as possible. The third area I would like to discuss is that DOE needs to foster better research collaboration both internally and externally. We will better integrate national lab, university, and industry research, and we will seek partnerships with other nations. For example, increased international cooperation on carbon capture and storage technology could reduce both the cost and time of developing the range of pre- and post-combustion technologies that are needed to meet the climate challenge. Finally, while we work on transformational technologies, DOE must improve its efforts to demonstrate next-generation technologies and to deploy demonstrated clean energy technologies at scale. The Loan Guarantee Program will be critical to these efforts by helping to commercialize technologies, and the Recovery Act funding for weatherization and energy efficiency block grant programs will accelerate the deployment of energy-efficient technologies. So I'm excited about the prospect of improving DOE's clean energy research, development, and deployment efforts. I thank you, and I'd be glad to answer your questions at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Chu, and exciting is the right term. You have an exciting portfolio, an important portfolio for our country, and we wish you the very best of luck. As you know, I am, well, first of all, at this time we'll begin questions, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. As you know, I am eager to see ARPA-E established, and I appreciate your comments. In your comment, you said that you wanted to see it, or it would be up and running as soon as possible, and I don't doubt your commitment. But could you give us a little bit of idea of what, some kind of rough timeline you see on getting ARPA-E up and running, and have you assigned a team to serve as any kind of a startup staff? And do you envision ARPA-E coordinating, or how do you envision ARPA-E coordinating its R&D with other programs and the national labs?
Right. So I've met with, there was a team of people that was trying to see what the structure should be like. I think it's very consistent with this committee's views. I did ask specifically how long it would take. I didn't like the answer. The answer was, quite frankly, the first pass answer was 1 year, and so I instructed them, go back and I want to see exactly the timeline of why it would take so long. There might be regulations, things like that, and I have not gotten back the answer to that. So I hope it would take much shorter than 1 year.
Well, as I think mentioned to you earlier, I know that DARPA has some programs that are available to pass off if you think that those are appropriate. And you also received $400 million in the recovery package. You know, how long is that going to last, and how, you know, what are your thoughts on spending those dollars? How much will that be used towards startup versus actual implementing a program?
Well, we first we're already looking around for the head of the ARPA-E program. I would hope, again, I was a little dismayed by this first pass at why it would take so long, but I think we are going to do things simultaneously. We're discussing drafting requests for proposals, so even as we search for a director and the key personnel. And so because it is part of the economic recovery, you know, we want to start actually funding projects, hopefully significantly less than 1 year.
Well, I think double or tripling tracking is the appropriate way to go. I mean, there's no, you know, so often around here we have to get through one thing and then the next thing and the next thing. You know, there can be those parallel tracks. There's draft legislation in the Senate that includes a provision to ensure that all ARPA-E project teams will be industry-led. Do you feel this is an appropriate direction to give ARPA-E, or should it have more flexibility?
I would like it to have more flexibility. Certainly, having an all industry-led may not be appropriate. Just as the old DARPA program, it funded universities, it funded other research, it funded industries, it funded startup companies, it funded established companies. And really, I would like to throw the door open to any and all and just pick the best ideas.
I would agree. I think flexibility is the key to ARPA-E's success, and you take whatever model is best for the particular situation that's before you. And do you have any thoughts as to a time frame on ARPA-E when it needs to be reviewed by the national academies?
Actually, when it gets reviewed by the best way to, in my opinion, the best way when you're starting something is to look at it very, very early, just in case you feel it's getting off the tracks. Now, but a National Academy review has certain time constraints, and so I would probably have an internal review, maybe working with this committee and others in Congress, within a year to actually see what's going on. Because if it is long-term things can be avoided if you catch things early. And so within a year of the start, for the first 6 months, you look at the tranche of proposals that have been recommended. Are these good choices? Are the people in place good people who are making the right decisions? And remember that this is the idea of this new funding mechanism is that it is a very small, very select group of people that are unconstrained by the usual things, so they can really make the best decisions. And to focus on those 3-year timescales, it's not stewardship. It's we'll give you money for a very short period of time, after maybe 5 years, that's it.
Right.
Get it done. And after 3 to 5 years, you better get some other sponsor. You know, industry better pick it up or something. And it actually, nothing focuses the mind like you know what, the termination of funding.
Well, you get it, and I'm glad that we've got you there. In your testimony, you say, my goal is nothing less than to build research networks within the department, across the government, throughout the nation, and around the globe. This is something that I have an interest in the sense that so many of our major research projects, carbon capture, sequestration, things of this nature, are going to be so expensive. And I think that we live in a world where it's, you know, it's sort of them that's got it and them that's don't, and we are in the don't category to a great extent. And so I think it benefits us to collaborate with other nations, both intellectually as well as financially. And so do you, I know, and I think G8 a while back had a resolution concerning CCS. Can you give us some of your thoughts in terms of what are those best areas of opportunity for international cooperation? And I'd like to better understand what that vehicle would be. You know, money's going to be involved. It seems to me that you're going to have a head of state to head of state agreement and a commitment to provide the funds. But then there's also going to have to be some type of an international protocol that's going to be set up, or the treaty or whatever. You know, what are your thoughts? Do we go, each one will be different, or is there a form for them all?
Okay, so let's start from the basic premise that when you build a coal power plant, most of that money is in infrastructure. You don't order a coal power plant, put it on a boat, and ship it. Just like similar with the building. So when first, let me back off and say that we don't actually know today what the best technology will be. There are a couple of approaches, both pre-combustion and post-combustion capture. One thing is for sure that we have to develop some post-combustion capture, because 99-point-something% of all the coal plants are pulverized coal, conventional coal plants. Before this, it will take some time to prove the technology, say roughly 10 years. In the meantime, we'll be still building, the world will still be building lots of conventional coal plants. So even if we develop a pre-combustion strategy going forward, there's all those investments in the post-combustion that we have to make. So there are several strategies that countries are looking at. I have been talking with all the equivalent, the energy ministers in various countries. When I say that how can we share what we know, I don't mean in a really intimate way, so that their engineers and people who are operating the coal plants are actually there in these pilot programs. It's the lessons learned in actually running the thing that's very important. That's the technical know-how. Because you can't, the IP issue, in my mind, is less important because most of this construction will be in the home country, like a building. So I think if we have the engineers and the people who are actually there learning the actual real-life experiences as we operate these pilot plants, so if Great Britain wants to build one, if China wants to build one, if Denmark wants to build one, we build one, we say, okay, this is the menu of things we need to explore. If country X does one, we do another one. And oh, by the way, we will have you send over your people so you're there with us and learning the lessons in real time. And similarly, the United States can be over there. It would be harder to craft an agreement where money goes overseas, especially in this economic times, because that money, for the billions of dollars, for example, the United States wants to spend on these pilot programs, it would be better spent in this country because it's part of the economic recovery, and similarly in all the other countries. But sharing the technical knowledge is something very different. And so you build up a common pool of knowledge mostly by being on site and sharing those lessons. When I talk about that, so far I've gotten a very good reception. Now, how do you get this crafted into a working agreement is really the issue. But right now, now's the time, because many countries, Europe is talking about 10 to 12 carbon sequestration piloting experiments or pre-commercial plants. We're talking of several here in the United States. I know China's talking of at least one. And within a year or so, it will be decided what's going to be done. So this is the time to actually get those.
Do you need any more tools to arrange these agreements?
Well, it's mostly, it's as you say, it's partly a State Department issue, but it's partly a energy issue. We'll find out as soon as, I was just meeting with the representative from China and DRC, NRDC and DRC, one of those two, and I was really interested in finding out. We will know what we need as soon as we actually start to craft an agreement, an actual agreement.
I don't want to take too much time. Can you give me real quickly 2 or 3 other prime areas for international cooperation in energy?
Buildings, the same reason. If you get together and try to design, for example, software tools to help architects and structural engineers design an energy efficient building, this is actually pretty sophisticated stuff. We don't understand how to design energy efficient buildings. And the reason I know I can say this is when we try to build a more energy efficient building, let's say reducing the energy by 50%, 80%, typically we fall short of the design goal. The actual performance is less than the design. And if you look at a scatter plot of the more aggressively we try to design an energy efficient building, the less efficient it becomes. We're
going to have to go into the, could you just give me the technologies? It's
building efficiency, software design tools.
Okay, and then any other areas of international cooperation you think would be beneficial?
I think in some of the other things, certainly software design tools for building efficiency, automobile efficiency, but then it quickly, there's some issues, quite frankly, that get into IP and other issues. And so I'm looking at those things which are, the investments will be made in that country, like buildings, like power plants, where I don't see as much of a barrier.
Okay. Thank you, and Mr. Hall, thank you for your patience there, and you're recognized.
I'm always patient with the chairman. And I join the chairman in lauding your appointment, not just Democrats, but some Republicans, knowing your history and your background, your ability to serve. We're pleased with your confirmation, and I think you know that. And I also have not been able to give our leader the assistance that he would like for me to have given him on ARPA-E, but it's the law of the land now, and I hope that it's going to be as beneficial as Chairman Gordon set out in his leadership of its passage, and I certainly support working it out for the greatest good for the greatest number, which is our goal always in that we do here. Mr. Secretary, let me just go right into what I'm disappointed in, though. I'm disappointed to see that the President's FY 2010 budget proposes to terminate the ultra-deepwater and unconventional natural gas and other petroleum resources research program, and I know you're familiar with that. It's been passed many times. It's been voted on several times by the House and Senate, and it's working. At first blush, the proposed termination appears to be part of an across-the-board effort to reduce or eliminate federal incentives for the domestic oil and gas industry and to belittle the importance, belittle the necessity of fossil fuels. And I strongly disagree with this policy. Every incremental BTU of domestic natural gas is as important as every additional kilowatt hour of solar energy in terms of reducing our dependence on oil imports. Currently, 33% of domestic natural gas production is from coal bed methane and tight formations such as shale, all of which is the outgrowth of DOE-funded R&D in this area. However, rather than simply talk about the energy security aspects on this issue, I'd like to focus on the scientific aspects of the ultra-deepwater and unconventional research and ask you several specific questions in that regard, sir. First, I understand that the administration's rationale is that this research benefits the large domestic oil and natural gas producers, and that they can otherwise pay for this research. And that's why President Bush changed his mind about it in the last part of his service and made efforts to repeal it, which once again the House and the Congress rejected and supported this program. I'm very sincere with you on that, and I really want to talk with you later on it. I spent a lot of time with the previous Secretary of Energy, and he was operating under a situation of where the president wasn't really for it in the last analysis, but he remained true to the oath he took and worked well with us, though I respected his support of the person that appointed him, as I do you. The University of Tulsa, though these are the things that I want to point out, University of Tulsa received $440,000 for a 36-month project of optimization of infill well locations in warm Sutter fields to increase production in existing wells, And Texas A&M University received $444,969 for a 24-month project to field test low-impact oil field access roads to reduce environmental footprints in desert areas. 3, the Colorado School of Mines received $860,000 for a 24-month program to investigate biochemical factors to enhance the generation of methane from coal to produce cleaner methane. And I could go on, but I think you get my point. These are not the major oil companies. They're national labs and research institutions that are benefiting and are serving and are partnering with this in energy efforts. It's as much a scientific thrust as it is an energy thrust. And all of these cases of existing research projects appear to me to represent cutting-edge, high-risk science led by university research teams. And I'm aware that each of these projects includes significant cost share provided by industry. Mr. Secretary, do you believe that the oil and gas industry, left to its own devices, would fund these types of research projects? I don't think so. Would you not agree that the character of these research projects is similar to the type of research projects funded by DOE Office of Science?
Well, actually, the type of research you just described, for example, improving our ability to recover oil from reservoirs, we typically only get about 30%, even with enhanced oil recovery methods, we typically get 30, maybe at most 40% of the oil in the ground. The rest of it is, with today's technology, unrecoverable. And so I think it is appropriate for the Department of Energy to be funding things like that. Injection of CO2 for enhanced oil recovery is something that has been proven to be commercially viable. There are other opportunities of injecting, for example, microbes deep in the strata, which will have which can liberate some of the oil and allow it to be pumped out. Those things I actually think it's appropriate the Department of Energy fund.
Well, I appreciate the fact that I believe you'll discuss it with us and,
yes,
and that we can talk to you about it, as we could talk to the former secretary as he was loyal to a president that objected and was on the other side. I was not accustomed to being on the other side of George Bush, but on this situation I surely was not there. Second, are you aware that there are currently 92 applications from universities, national labs, state agencies, and private R&D technology development companies totaling $105 million that have been peer-reviewed and are awaiting action? I'm told that these projects are immediately ready to proceed and would immediately employ researchers and supporting personnel. Should this not qualify for use of some of the stimulus funds?
Well, actually, I'm not aware of the details of the proposals, that, and I certainly will look into it.
But you're open to
yes,
submitting them to you. And finally, Mr. Secretary, I'd like to ask you if you have personally reviewed the quality of research supported by this program. If not, could you provide me with your assurance that you'll personally look into this and give me your assessment prior to taking any further actions in the funding issue? I greatly respect your scientific credentials and would welcome your personal review.
I'm not
alone in this, because right up and down this row we voted for this program more than once, and we think that we're getting energy from this program that we wouldn't get if we didn't have this energy, and it's being paid for by the energy we do get, so it's no cost to the taxpayers, actually. And I want to talk to you about it.
Okay, I'm looking forward to talking to you about it. I actually didn't know, I'll confess, that the deep water ocean recovery was actually supporting these other things of enhanced oil recovery on land. Yeah. So I would be looking forward to talking to you.
And I thank the chair for letting me go over a little bit.
Mr. Wu, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. You've blown into town like a breath of fresh air. I love your talk about transformational technologies. For the moment, I'd like to invite you to talk a little bit about more mundane things like standards and interoperability and metrics. With respect to two areas, one is proposed cap and trade legislation, and the other is for the proposed smart grid. With respect to cap and trade legislation, as you see it, are there remaining metrics or measurement issues, both with respect to measuring for the cap and quantifying and measuring for the trading units? And can the National Institute of Standards and Technology or other measurement groups be helpful in creation of both the legislation and the regulatory format to follow?
I think in terms of the measurements, I'm not deeply connected to how one evaluates things. You're talking about, for example, overall life cycle emissions for a cement industry or steel or
whether one views it as life cycle or even just measuring at one moment in time and accurately doing so, two different problems.
Right, and so the measurement itself, it does become important if an estimate of how much carbon is being emitted would influence how much allowances one would have. I did not know that this was that controversial. There are I do know there are varying degrees in an industry, let's say in a cement industry, of varying degrees of how efficient some plants are. But I didn't realize that, you look at plant X or a coal burning plant, and, you see these ratings. The most efficient coal burning plants are, let's say, 42% efficient. The least efficient are actually in the mid-low 20s. I was expecting that the estimates of how much emissions these plants were making per amount of energy produced was not that controversial. If it is, that would be an issue. I would certainly look into that. That's the sense I'm getting from your question.
Yes, I'm trying to get my arms around it, and I was hoping that you knew more than I did. And it looks like we both have some research to do in this field.
Give me some time, and to see how controversial the estimates would be is specifically, I think, the question I'm hearing. Right?
Yes, and then life cycle estimates are another. Right. Then with respect to smart grid, in a prior energy bill, we put in some language on interoperability. And I wanted to get your take on the current status of two different issues. One is interoperability, different components of a smart grid, and the other is the issue of open source versus proprietary software to operate significant parts of a smart grid.
This is something I did look into almost within the first few weeks. Well, I've only been here for only a couple of weeks anyway, so so I guess everything I've looked into is in the first couple of weeks. But in any case, yes, I think in the 2005 Energy Act, it was commanding that DOE, in cooperation with NIST, get some standards. And I have to say that I've been somewhat disappointed. They're just beginning to sort of arrange the seating chart around the negotiating table, to put it, in foreign diplomacy language. So we've held a couple of meetings with people from NIST to say this has to be fast-tracked, because this has been going on for almost 2 years. The issue is essentially that, first, I'm in favor of open standards. I'm very much in favor of industry actually coming together and agreeing on an open standard. And so I am pushing very, very hard that this thing really get moving. I've talked to several people. Even before I came in becoming Secretary of Energy, I've talked to people from many of the companies like Siemens and ABB. I talked to the CEO of General Electric very recently. Every time I talk, they say, we're all in favor of this. And I said, but let's stop jockeying for a slight commercial advantage. It's too important, which is what standards negotiations are all about. And so what we're doing, the plan now is, also FERC is in on this, is the distribution centers. These are the really big dollar stuff, you know, the digital relays, the transformers, things that have to have a communication standard system. Those standards have to be developed first. The commercial, you know, consumer stuff is the last thing. So at least we said we've got to get what we want in the standards, and we have to get it very quickly. It's been a week or two since that meeting. I haven't gotten feedback. That's the other thing I found out is you know, you typically have to get a next meeting with deliverables for that meeting in order to actually make sure it goes forward. But this is very much on my radar screen.
Well, I wrote a part of that language referring to the 2005 legislation. I wrote part of that language at 40,000 feet. So I attached to it, and if I can help you get some results on that from NIST or other agencies, very much like to work with you on that.
Yeah, I think as we develop these pilot experiments in smart grids, unless you have the communication standards in place, people are very afraid to make millions and tens of millions and even hundreds of millions of dollars investment, or because of the retrofit. So the standards thing very early is something that's very important. I've actually raised it with the president, and he's actually said he'd be willing to go into a meeting and say, you know, I said we should lock him up in the room and say, don't come out until you have a standard.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. Secretary Child told you early on that 4 years goes very quickly, and you're seeing the rope-a-dope that can make it go that way. So you've absolutely got the right idea. It takes that leadership. You've got to push it down to make it work. Dr. Bartlett is recognized.
Thank you very much. Welcome aboard, sir. To the extent that we've not been as aggressive as we might have in finding new oil fields, to the extent that we've not done what we might well have done in enhanced oil recovery, I'm encouraged, because that means there's going to be a little bit more oil for my 10 kids, my 16 grandkids, and my 2 great-grandkids. We've been relating ourselves to oil as if it were infinite, that there would be no end to it. That, of course, is not true. There is such a thing as peak oil. It was predicted by M. King Hubbard in 1956 for our country. Right on schedule, it occurred in 1970. And although we've drilled more oil wells than all the rest of the world put together, we cannot make M. King Hubbard a liar. A couple of years ago, I led a CODEL to China, and we were talking about energy. And they began their discussion of energy by noting post-oil. There will be a post-oil world, of course. We think in terms of the next election, which for us in Congress is never less than 2 years away. And in the business world, they kind of think in terms of the next quarterly report. If they can't make that look good, why the stockholders are going to be angry at them. In that part of the world, they tend to think in terms of generations and centuries. Of course, there will be a post-oil world. Hyman Rickover gave a great speech, I think probably the most insightful speech of the last century. It was given 52 years ago, the 14th day of this May, to a group of physicians in St. Paul, Minnesota. And in that speech, he noted that the age of oil would be but a blip in the history of man. The 8,000, as he said, the 8,000-year recorded history of man. He had no idea then how long the age of oil would last, but he said how long it lasted was important in only one regard. The longer it lasted, the more time would we have to plan an orderly transition to other energy sources. Of course, we have not been doing that. We've been behaving as if oil is forever. I'm concerned, sir, about the lack of urgency in our country and indeed around the world. business as usual will not suffice. China is buying up oil all over the world. In today's world, it makes no difference who owns the oil. The person who comes with the dollars buys the oil. Why, sir, do you think China is buying up oil all over the world? And what do you think our response ought to be to that?
China is has been following somewhat America's economic development. It's buying oil because as its economy grows, it needs more oil.
But, sir, today you don't need to own the oil to have the oil. You simply come with the dollars and you buy the oil. Why are they buying the oil?
Are you saying why? Well, they're establishing, my understanding is they're establishing relationships with countries, as did the United States and does the United States, in terms of the oil suppliers. But I agree with you. Oil is a commodity. It's in the market, and you can buy from one supplier or another supplier.
At the same time they're buying up this oil all over the world, they are very aggressively building a blue water navy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine, sir, that the day may come when the Chinese tell us, I'm sorry, guys, but we own the oil, and we have 1,300,000,000 people, and 900 million of them live in rural areas, and through the miracle of communications, they know the benefits of an industrialized society, and they're demanding it, and we are not going to share our oil with you. To make that a reality, wouldn't they have to have a big blue water navy?
Well, I think this goes to a larger question of why the United States should work very hard for energy independence and oil independence. And there's two ways of doing this. One is to develop sources at home. One is to develop alternative sources, for example, biofuels, which I personally believe, if we do the science correctly, can be a huge addition to liquid transportation fuel. Another thing is use less oil by making more efficient cars, personal vehicles, electric vehicles, so we can offload and transfer the personal transportation needs to electricity, which then there's a wider palette of options available. So the thing that the United States can do best instead of jockeying for positions, is to actually decrease our importation of oil in a significant way by all of the above-mentioned things. And so that's the best thing we can do, and this is something we should do.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and Dr. Baird is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to be very quick with 5 questions, then you can answer them in the time available. First, I'd invite you to speak briefly about the constraint on the administrative costs on DOE that were imposed on the stimulus and how that will affect you. Mm-hmm. Second, could you talk a little bit about CO2's impact on the oceans, particularly ocean acidification? Third, your views on behavior change and conservation as a quick response to both our energy and our climate overheating. Fourth, the role of forest products in renewable energies. And finally, if you have time left, a little bit about the national labs. Thank you.
Okay, so the first is a technical issue. Thank you for the questions. In the Economic Recovery Act, there's in order to, for example, administer the loans and to make sure that that money is wisely invested and to have proper oversight, you need additional administrative costs. In the other agencies, they were given 1% of the total to administer those costs. This is an example. For some reason, not clear to me, the Department of Energy was giving 0.5%.
So as important as energy is, we've sort of shorted you. We've said you only get half of what the other agencies get.
Right, to administer the loans, for example, and the things that we need to do to make sure that the money is given out wisely, that there's proper oversight, things of that nature. So that's worrisome.
I would hope we can try to address that, and we'll do what we can to help.
Okay. In terms of the CO2 impact, there are many impacts. I share your concern that perhaps the oceans are not mentioned enough. What happens is as the CO2 in the atmosphere increases, more carbon dioxide is absorbed in the oceans. It becomes more acidic. Today, the oceans are about 30% more acidic than they were in pre-industrial revolution times. It's significant. And when the ocean becomes more acidic, several things are known to happen. Coral is threatened. The little critters that when you go snorkeling, hit your snorkel mask, where they have calcium carbonate shells, those organisms actually, when the pH gets too low, near pH 7, what's going to happen is that they will lose their ability to capture the carbon and put it in their shells and actually construct the shells. So lab experiments where they just deliberately make it more acidic, they find that they lose their ability. When that happens, the whole food chain in the ocean is at risk. So now that's not going to happen anytime soon, but these are some of the issues that one is concerned about. In terms of behavior change, this is something that if you look in the history of how you get the United States to respond very quickly, we should be paying more attention to this. If you consider what happened in World War II, there were posters saying that we should save energy, especially transportation fuel, because any drop we saved in energy and transportation fuel could be used in our wartime effort. And there's a great deal of input, and Americans rose to the challenge, and it became their patriotic duty to save energy. Now we have a similar situation. If you save energy, for example, by getting more fuel-efficient cars, you decrease the demand. That will keep the prices down. There's a lot less carbon in the atmosphere, and we are less dependent on foreign oil. And so I think it's a threefer, if you will, in terms of not only patriotic duty to our country, but actually to the world. And I think to get this notion that it's good in many, many ways to think about decreasing your consumption of energy, whether it be turning off light bulbs or your computers after you're done, or buying a more fuel-efficient car when that opportunity arises. These are all things that we need to do. The United States has convinced a younger generation that it is not cool to smoke cigarettes, and that has changed behavior. And I think we should convince the younger generation and the older generation that it's actually cool to save energy and to become much more energy efficient. This is something that the world really needs. So this change of behavior is something America has been able to do in the past, and we know we have the tools. I think I'm all for talking more about that. And in terms of, you mentioned forest products, this goes to the question of biofuels. Already these biofuel programs in our national labs have already altered yeast and bacteria so that the yeast and bacteria, when fed simple sugars, can produce not just ethanol, but gasoline-like fuel and diesel-like fuel and jet plane-like fuel. And so now they're working on increasing our productivity to make it economically viable. The good thing about the feedstock is they want to use all of the lumber wastes, the agricultural wastes that include wheat straw, rice straw. Half the corn stover can be used. The other half has to be plowed back into the fields, but half the corn stover can be used. All of the agricultural waste that we either burn or we let rot that ends up, and the microbes turn that into carbon dioxide and methane, we should be converting that to either helping co-burning in coal burning plants, or better still, converting this into transportation fuel, again, to help break our oil dependency. This is something that the national labs, the Department of Energy, is working very hard in doing, because this could be a significant. This could be half our non-diesel jet plane transportation fuel, and finally, the national lab systems.
Dr. Chu, we're going to get to the national labs later, if that's okay. I'm sure that'll be of interest to other folks too. Ms. Biggert is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. You and I have had a brief conversation earlier on nuclear energy, and I'd like to get to that. But just before I do that, going back to a question that Chairman Gordon asked you, and that was about the technology transfer on an international basis. Section 1001 in the EPACT bill of 05 addressed that issue of having a new technology transfer coordinator and working group appointed to work with to have a basis of working with developing countries to deploy clean and efficient energy technologies, and then listed the barriers and the concerns. I don't know if you've worked with that or have a coordinator in place.
No, I don't have a coordinator yet.
Okay, well, I refer you to this bill. It's Public Law 10958 also. But you and I have discussed very briefly nuclear energy and reprocessing, and I was concerned to hear that that you've moved beyond the repository of Yucca Mountain, and I'm the decision of the administration, and I really am concerned about that. So, where does that leave the Department of Energy in regards to reprocessing and the next generation of nuclear plants?
Well, first, let me start off by saying that I do firmly believe that nuclear energy has to be part of our energy supply in this century, for sure, because it is carbon-free. And so in terms of the waste, what the NRC has said is that if you store the waste in dry cask storage at the current sites, it is safe for decades from leakage into the environment. So that means we have time to develop a much more comprehensive plan. I am working, I know the Senate has already begun to talk about this, and we have independently, but would like to work with Congress in this to put together a very blue ribbon panel of experts, of technical experts and wise people who can help us devise recommendations for a plan that actually, a comprehensive plan and a fresh look at how we can store nuclear waste and eventually dispose of it. The whole Yucca Mountain issue is the landscape has changed over the 25 years when this first started. The conditions for, first it was started as 10,000 years and it had to be retrievable. Then appeals court ruling said no, if science says it could, the leak out rate could extend to 1 million years, then so be it, then it should be 1 million years and yet still be retrievable. That's a tough, so the conditions changed, and so I would like a committee to say, okay, let's look at a fresh look at the things and what's our best strategy for moving forward in nuclear power.
Well, President Carter shut this down, what, 25, 30 years ago, and that really has set the U.S. back on nuclear energy. But over the past 30 years, our national labs have been conducting research on Yucca Mountain, and your laboratory was part of that, many of the scientists, and it really has some of our, hundreds of our best scientists and engineers have been working on this, and it just seems like this is such a setback. And this research has been incorporated into the Yucca Mountain license application, which is now before the NRC. It just seems like we're just going back to page one again and starting over. And I think that if we are ever going to end our dependence on foreign oil, that nuclear has to be, in the long term, the one that will take us over the top and really solve that problem. I don't know if you've received the comprehensive briefings on deficiencies of Yucca Mountain science and by whom, but I really am concerned about this, and I think that we really have a lot of permits out there for new type of reactors, and if we don't move now, I don't know when this is going to happen. This is a real setback.
Well, I do share your feeling that we do not want to start the restarting. I want to see the restarting of the nuclear industry in the United States. So, the goal that you and I both share. The other thing is that I fully intend to fund research in developing recycling methods that are proliferation resistant. That's
but I
again,
think that's already
time.
happened, and I know Argonne has worked on that, and Idaho, and there's there's been a lot of research on that already, and there are some demonstration projects, and we're really ready to go 2 years ago.
Well, okay, so my understanding of that, certainly Argonne and people in Idaho have been looking at modifying the original Purex process, which is
Right.
the process that France
to
uses.
Eurex.
And now it's a Eurex process, but those people who have developed those, like Philip Fink, feel that it's not ready for piloting. That there are still issues.
Who are those
well,
people?
Those people are people like Philip Fink. He used to be at Argonne. He's now in charge of that program in Idaho. I think he's very, very knowledgeable. Those are people who I do have a lot of trust in, and they are saying that we need to do more research before we build pilot plants.
Thank you, and Ms. Giffords is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming before our committee today. It's no big surprise for members here that I'm very passionate about my home state of Arizona and solar energy. When you think about over 300 days of sunshine that Arizona has, other western states, and frankly the whole country really, I mean comparing where we are with other countries, specifically Germany, Japan, of course Spain, I believe the United States is missing an incredible opportunity. So I was really delighted to hear your comments earlier about your emphasis for DOE to start pushing for, I think 5 times cheaper technology for photovoltaics. But I'd like to specifically ask you about the actions for DOE under your leadership in terms of engaging with the private sector for solar. Could you be a little bit more specific?
Well, it depends. See, normally what has happened in the past is the Department of Energy will do some science, invest in some science, and get some patents and license the patents. I would want to go forward in an era where we begin to work with companies in a much more intimate way to get sort of while the work is being done. I think companies do bring a lot of experiences in the sense that they are more tuned to manufacturability issues than anyone in a laboratory. And so one of the things I have heard in the past is that, I was in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, and there are a lot of photovoltaic companies there. And when I hear things like, well, the research direction in a particular laboratory, we stopped paying attention because in an effort to achieve a world record of incrementally better efficiency, they've gone away from manufacturability. I'm thinking to myself, this is not good. And so I think that it's ultimately going to be the cost of manufacturability, and whether it's, you pick a number, whether it's 22% for silicon versus 22.5%, or for the very advanced ones, multicolored ones, of going from 39 to 40%, it's not as important as getting the cost down. Yeah. And so, so that's one of the things I would really dearly love to have is that the companies who have to deal with the manufacturability issues are actually there side by side with the scientists in the national labs and universities.
I always laugh when you go to the Bay Area. It seems like everyone who's got a business card has got a solar energy business card. It's an incredible melting pot for a lot of that technology. My concern, not just is that from the patent side, but I don't see enough demonstration projects actually taking place. There's a lot of R&D going on, a lot of money in that area, but in terms of actually rolling the projects out, I don't see enough of it.
Well, I think the loan guarantee will help some of that. I think renewable portfolio standards, which create a draw of the market, will also help some of that. But solar thermal, for example, large-scale solar thermal right now is less expensive than photovoltaic, and there are some projects that are being considered in California. I know of at least one that I think should be given a chance. These are a couple 100-megawatt projects, very significant projects, which also have in it some energy storage as well, because you can store the heat. Yeah. And I agree. So those things should be demonstrated. And I think loan guarantees and things like that will help.
One of the areas I think we can get our biggest bang for the buck is with our United States military. I had a chance to visit Nellis Air Force Base last year, and this is an incredible great success story in terms of a public-private partnership. When you look at the DoD, 80% of all of the federal government's energy is used by the DoD, and I believe that military bases provide us the best ability to, in a very quick way, unlike a lot of other areas of our federal government, to put projects, to install projects, get them going. And I'm just curious about DOE's ability to partner with DoD in put some of these demonstration projects, if you're working on that and if it's on your radar screen.
It is now, but it certainly is true that the Department of Defense does they have a lot of land as well, and so they actually have the ability to test a lot of things in solar energy as one example, and so I will look into it.
Yeah, looking forward to working with you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Secretary, I sort of just listened to the conversation. I probably have one of the most environmentally sensitive, parts of California, the coastal area of North San Diego. In fact, one of my communities that probably pride themselves on environmental sensitivity and was pushing renewables way back in the 80s. Happened to be the first city that outlawed wind generators within their jurisdiction too. So one of the biggest concerns I've had coming from local government was how much government is standing in the way. Let me first say, as a former member of the Air Resources Board in California, knowing your record, I was really excited to hear that the administration was looking to you to take this position. And I really feel good about it. And I really feel good about it for one reason. You were somebody, along with your other directors of the Department of Energy, to stand up and be willing to say what needed to be said and not worry about the political repercussions. And I think it says a lot about the administration that they were willing to choose somebody who had said something that might not have been politically correct at the time, but was scientifically essential to be said. And your position in August, along with the other secretaries, on the absolute essential part that nuclear power is going to play in climate change issues, show that you were brave enough to say that. And I think more people like yourself standing up will send the signal to everybody that those who are so prejudiced against this clean form of energy need to rethink their prejudice. At this time, with what you know, would you agree that the disposal issue is not the overwhelming blocking barrier that some people have thought it was back in the 70s and the 80s?
I think we can find a solution to disposal. Maybe you call me stupid or crazily optimistic, because there's time, because we can work up better solutions. The safety, I think, is less of an issue as well. I think the newer generation reactors are going to be far safer. In fact, ultimately, we will have passively safe reactors in the sense that you lose control of the reactor completely and you won't get a meltdown. The issue actually is a commercial issue. How do you increase the licensing speed? So because these are $5–8 billion reactors, and if you have a 12-year licensing and building program, that's many billions of dollars, which is not generating revenue.
Again, this falls in that category of, does government allow the technology to be used like the wind generator? Down the line on the technology issue, we talk about as setting efficiency goals and trying to allowing people to think outside the box. Right in with a lot of this kind of challenges, does our regulation and guidelines allow that? I'll give you an example. In my district, I've got Aptera, which is developing a new car that went out and started reverse engineering, designing the most aerodynamic, most efficient system, was able to develop a car that gets over 100 miles to a gallon at this time, with the potential going out to 200 with hybrids. But when the company applied to the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Loan Program, even though the vehicle passes all the crash tests, all the safety tests, everything that we perceive as being a car, because the scientists saw that having a second wheel in the back caused 25% reduction, they went to a three-wheeled vehicle. Because it was 3 and not 4 wheels, it was not allowed to apply for this loan.
would you strongly support the modification of these kind of arbitrary lines so that they reflect outcome rather than process?
I certainly would look into that. Whether you know, a three-wheeled car is not a car, which is essentially your question. You know, if it does all the things a car does, it might be a car.
I think so. I would, in fact, Mr. Secretary, after you're finished with this hearing, if you go downstairs, the car is out front as an example of the kind of things we need to do rather than having regulations to block it. Speaking of government regs, you make a reference to the fact that we need to be looking at gasoline-like biofuels rather than working off of alcohol that takes 1.5 gallons to match traditional fuels. And in fact, let me just take another shot at ethanol, which I never pass up a chance as a member of the former member of the Air Board. Duke just came out with a study that said, from the greenhouse point of view, it would be better never to plant the corn than to use corn-based ethanol. But when you talk about these non-food crops, would you be including in that the algae technology that we're seeing developed around the country?
Yes. You know, one doesn't really know whether the best solution to biofuels are biofuels through the conversion of the lignocellulose material or through the growing of algae, which actually can grow directly lipids that can be converted to oils and diesel-like oils. The verdict is not in. The thing about the lignocellulose is in a certain sense, it's more ready for prime time only because we have lots of agricultural waste already. The issue with algae is you would have to prepare land or oceans specifically for this. There's also issues of whether it escapes into the wild, but I'm all for looking at algae. Don't get me wrong.
Okay, well, there was a reference.
Thank you, Mr. Bilberry.
Okay. Thank you,
Mr. Hall was going to lead a delegation downstairs to see if your vehicle quacks a little bit later. Ms. Edwards is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Chu, for being here today. I have a couple of questions about the loan guarantee program under Title 17. When the program was started, I wasn't in Congress at the time, but I believe that it was to, and I'll use the words in the legislation, avoid, reduce, or sequester air pollutants or greenhouse gases, employ new or significantly improved technologies, and provide a reasonable prospect of repayment. And so I have some questions about the rules that have been promulgated by the department for the loan guarantee program, and wonder what the rationale under this legislative language is for guaranteeing loans for mature technologies rather than making significant investments in some of the innovative technologies that perhaps traditional financing isn't available for. And then I'd like you to address the question of the risk to taxpayers under the loan guarantee program, because the taxpayer essentially absorbs 100% of that. And I think we've already seen in our capital markets that when all of that's absorbed by the taxpayer, the markets just don't function very well, and the risk isn't at least shared with the innovator. And so I wonder if you could address this issue.
Sure. Well, first, in terms of the loan guarantees, there's a scoring of the loan. If you take an industry makes an application, if it's a relatively mature industry like wind, you know that if you run the business correctly, that it's likely that the business will be successful, the loan will be repaid. And so there is an official way of scoring these loans. The higher the risk of the loan, the more you have to have an allowance that says, okay, there's a higher probability that it won't be repaid, so then it doesn't go as far. I mean, right now the idea was that they're sort of leveraging a 10-to-1, that if the loan is $100 million, you put in $10 million that you expect will be, quote, the average default rate. As you take on higher risk industries, then and you have to score this as best you can, then the default rate will naturally be higher because it's higher risk. But actually, I agree with you. We should be making some higher risk loans. And we have looked into this. That would be of the amount of money you can have now the higher risk loans are more experimental, and so you can make a smaller attempt at trying to get this thing going. But there's nothing wrong with saying that there might be a 30% chance of a default on a loan, but it could be more game-changing. So that's another way of trying to introduce innovative technology. And so there have been discussions now in the Department of Energy. I've been discussing this, that a small fraction of our loans could be higher risk, that could be much more innovative, much more likely to fail, but could lead to bigger changes in the long run.
And so you're about to announce some of the loan guarantees, and so can you assure us, though, that those won't be guarantees in the much more mature technologies like liquid coal, nuclear?
Well, well, no. For example, there have been, for example, in nuclear, there's been $18.5 billion to help restart the nuclear industry, and so that's been a carve out for nuclear, and those loans are designated to helping companies. You know, we've had a dormant nuclear industry for the last 30 years. The last one nuclear reactor that's been started in the early middle 70s. Okay.
Those kind of significant investments in nuclear technology. Just as I close out here, because I'd like to explore this at some other point later, it seems that these guarantees for nuclear, though, are going out before the licensing, and so there's a lot of time between here and there and billions of dollars in investment, and I wonder if those billions, given where we are with climate and our energy crunch, whether that money actually couldn't be better spent to better speculating on whether the nuclear industry investment is going to be the one that will, save us from fossil fuels.
Well, I think there's no one single technology that's going to save us, and including, and in fact, quite frankly, with fossil carbon capture and sequestration is one of those things. But right now, where we are in the United States is we have only 2.8% roughly of our nation's electricity is generated with renewables, excluding hydro, which is 6 or 7%. And so it's going to take a while to ramp that up. And the costs are, in wind is becoming competitive, but they're not there yet for photovoltaics, with costs without subsidy. And there are distribution issues, there are storage issues. I, for one, would dearly love to see us transition to all renewable solar, wind, things like that by mid-century, but one doesn't really know if one could do that. So you put the pedal to the floor on that, but you also try to ensure that while we're transitioning, you clean up coal as much as you can, and don't forget that the rest of the world, notably China and India, will not turn their back on coal. So that's why it's so important to try to develop commercially viable sequestration methods. So I think you just have to do all of these things. You've heard this before. There are no silver bullets.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. And Mr. Smith is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your service and willingness to come here today and share with you, I think, one of our most pressing needs relating to energy, the economy, the environment, and I appreciate the mention of so many sources of energy here today. There was a mention of corn-based ethanol prior from one of my colleagues on this end of the dais. If you could elaborate, perhaps, truly I come from a district that is relating to corn-based ethanol and livestock production, so it creates a need for balance, and I was wondering if you could speak to further research on corn-based ethanol so that we can be even more efficient. I know we've come a long way already using less water, making the ratios better. If you could elaborate on that.
Well, corn-based ethanol, I think, is I view as, you know, if you do the life cycle costs, and there are varying opinions about this, but in the end, it brings you a little reduction, you know, in the amount of fossil fuel invested versus net fuel gotten out, but the potential for the lignocellulose approach or the algae approach is far higher. So right now, you know, if you take and you look at all these underlying assumptions for corn-based, also on CO2, the net CO2 reductions, we're talking about net fossil reductions of 20% and CO2 reductions of a similar nature, but the promise of lignocellulose and algae can be 90%. And so now, in the end, farmers will be happy to plant anything that they can make some money on. And so I rather than saying we have to protect corn-based ethanol, I think if we develop technologies that can use a lot of the existing infrastructure in the fermentation of starches like corn, it's the same type of infrastructure. There will be yeast and bacteria that will convert grasses and agricultural waste into fuel. I don't really see, personally, a conflict in terms of rural American farmers. In fact, when I've given a couple of talks over the years to that part of the country, and they would like very much to be using their agricultural waste and also to be growing these grasses, because these are perennials. In autumn time, the nutrients are, especially the nitrogen, is drawn back, and the precious minerals are drawn back into the roots. You chop off the top part. The cell wall, where the cellulose is the energy stuff. We don't use the nitrogen, and so that means a big decrease in the energy inputs from fertilizer, which is made from natural gas to ammonia to fertilizer, is eliminated. A lot of the inputs in the diesel tractor fuel is eliminated. So less capital investment of the farmer each year, because each year the farmer makes a gamble, you know, and a significant capital investment to yield a crop. So if they can get a similar return, a better return on investment, a similar overall net, they would be very happy. So I think, you know, corn-based ethanol, think of it as a transition crop to get Americans used to the idea that you can grow transportation fuel. But it is by far and away not the ideal. And that's why we're investing much more in lignocellulose or algae. That's why, for example, BP, which invested in University of California, Berkeley Lab in Illinois, $500 million, because they think they weren't interested in ethanol from starches like corn. They were saying that's not the long-term future.
It seems that the commercial viability of cellulosic ethanol for 10 years we've been told that it's about 5 years off. How close are we?
I think you're getting a different class of people going into this, and this is true of the energy sector in general. Not that people who were working on it 10 years ago were lesser scientists, but I think now there's a real mobilization. I mean, 6 years ago, I decided that the energy and climate change problem was so serious that I was willing to forgo a very, very comfortable life at Stanford as a professor and run a national lab, which is much less comfortable. and for the same reason why I took this job, which is even less comfortable. And that many scientists are thinking that this issue, this is one of the most important issues that science and technology has to solve in the coming decades. And it's becoming such an important issue, and an internationally important issue, because as commented in this committee, it does help define geopolitical stands around the world as well. So international security, you know, economic prosperity, environmental concerns, all say that we've got to solve the problem. Because of that, just as in World War II, many scientists volunteered and enlisted to serve the country, I'm seeing now many scientists thinking, if there's something I can do on energy, what can I do? And they're trying to teach themselves. Also, a new idealism in America's youth in college, that they're actually thinking of going to science and engineering because they see this as a way to serve the world and their country. So when you have that enthusiasm in the scientific and engineering world and you harness it properly, I think we can expect much greater progress. And this is what the Department of Energy funding really is all about, quite frankly, to take advantage of that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Hopefully this is the new Sputnik. And Mr. Smith, hopefully also that shucks and cobs have a future so we can all win. Ms. Fudge is recognized.
Well, you are raising a very important issue. A cap and trade bill will likely increase the cost of electricity, and so in the administration's plan of using a significant part of that money. First, there are two issues. There's the poorer part of society that has to be guarded against, and so a part of the administration's plan is to try to ensure that the poorer segments of our society are not really hurt. With regard to increasing the costs, let me go straight to the heart of the matter. Many of these costs will be passed on to the consumers, but the issue is how do we interact in terms of the rest of the world if other countries don't impose a cost on carbon, then we would be in a disadvantage. And I think the only way to do this is to, and already the administration and others before have talked about it, that you have to think about if you have something that's manufactured in another country that is not including the cost of emitting the carbon, because there's a cost in emitting the carbon, right, to society. If country X doesn't do this, then I think we should look at considering perhaps duties that would offset that cost, just as we're beginning to talk about that in terms of even what we call local pollution costs like sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide. So that will help level the playing field. Now, in the end, I think one hopes that all countries will include the cost of this energy, and I really think about it as including the so-called external costs that are not folded into the direct price now. But if a country does not do that, in order to protect American industries, we have to think about something like that. I hope so. I think there are, in very energy-intensive industries, at least some of them that I know about, they themselves are looking very hard at their manufacturing processes or chemical processes, because if they save just a little bit on making it more efficient, this is tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So it matters a great deal to the companies, and the more forward-looking companies, they're much more aggressive about this because they see in the long term energy costs just increasing because it in the long term, as noted before, energy, oil and natural gas production will eventually peak and decline, plateau, and then finally decline. So I think the energy efficiency of industries and companies is a very big deal, and the Department of Energy will do what it can as much as possible to help encourage the companies to look at their own businesses.
Thank you, Ms. Fudge, for getting those important issues here on the table. We need to talk about them, and Dr. Ehlers is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Chu, for being here. I will give you a little relief. I have very few questions, several statements and comments, but I hope we'll have some private time as physicists to talk about my questions later.
Maybe the chairman can give you an extra 5 minutes.
I doubt it. There is a majority here and a minority.
You want to go home for dinner, don't you?
First of all, I'm absolutely delighted with your appointment, and I have been very disappointed for some time in what I consider the failure of the Department of Energy to really meet the important energy challenges of our nation. And I'm really looking forward to your leadership, and I hope it becomes a renaissance similar to the days when Glenn Seaborg and the Atomic Energy Commission really got the ball started on this. So I'm looking forward to great things. I also want to commend the department. Recently they had a competition for a facility for rare isotope beams, and I want to commend you and especially the department. I thought they did a very fair process and evaluation, and obviously those of us in Michigan are pleased with the result. But I think it was a model of how it should be done and how the department can work with the universities. On that score, that's the one strong point I see for ARPA-E. I was not overjoyed with the way it ended up being structured, but I think this is a golden opportunity for the Department of Energy to essentially take a role that National Science Foundation fills for many other areas of research. And I hope ARPA-E really fulfills that promise and brings the universities in. We have so much talent available in the universities, and I don't think the Department of Energy has adequately made use of the university resources in the past 20 years or so. The one exception of that, of course, is Ray Orbach, who did a marvelous job in the Office of Energy in the past 8 years, and I'm just we made so much progress there, and I assume you will be eager to continue that progress as well. The few comments on some of the other issues. There's a lot of talk about sequestration. I am still very much a doubter. I think just looking at it, it looks to me like it's going to be very difficult to do it in an economically feasible way, particularly when you're talking about China and India doing it. Obviously, we have the resources to do it. At least we hope we do. But I just have to register some skepticism on counting a lot on clean coal or sequestration to deal with the carbon problem. And that's going to take a lot of work on your part and our part as well. One other comment, it's always bothered me in talking about Yucca Mountain. We've always talked about disposal of nuclear waste. Not disposing of them, they're still there. And I think that's been a fallacy all along. We thought we could dispose of them. We can't. We can perhaps transform them into a more benign form, and that's a possibility. But I think we should get rid of that word disposal and talk about nuclear storage, particularly monitored, retrievable storage, things of that sort. On solar energy, you put a lot of emphasis on solar energy, but you seem to imply the use of large facilities to produce electricity from solar energy. I'm of a different mind. Since solar energy there's huge amounts of solar energy available, but it's very diffuse, and that makes it difficult to use. It's low quality energy, and I think we ought to recognize that. I think the best answer, if you have a diffuse source, then have diffuse collectors. I would love to have every home in America shingled with solar shingles instead of asphalt shingles. And that brings up the other issue you raised. If we're going to do that, one of the most pressing needs is going to be safe, efficient, economical storage of electrical energy. You referred to it in the context of automobiles. I think maybe equally or perhaps even more important in homes, if we can in fact develop good solar shingles that are dependable, long-lasting, et cetera. We need a storage mechanism. And right now, batteries are too expensive, too clunky, too difficult. And I would hope that the department would be able to make some major contributions in terms of battery development, and particularly returning that industry to America instead of depending on other countries to do the research. So that's pretty much my short sermon for today, and I hope you will take those comments in mind.
Thank you, Dr. Ehlers. We'll let you be on the next panel. Mr. Wilson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming before our committee today. My question goes back to clean coal technology. On several occasions, the President has said that he supports clean coal technology. Mr. Secretary, right now, I have a coal liquid plant that's fully permitted in my district. I happen to believe that coal to liquid is a good form of clean coal technology. Interested in what your opinion is as to clean coal and clean coal technology.
I think coal to liquid with the capture a significant part of the carbon, the excess carbon, is something that's worth looking at. I'll go further to say that when you start doing coal to liquids, the first thing you do is gasify, and then you assemble. It's an old process invented for World War II by the Germans. When you do it with agricultural waste and coal as the feedstock and capture the excess carbon, when you produce the fuel and burn it, of course, that carbon in that fuel is released back to the atmosphere. But you can actually provide, if, for example, if it's all bio-based, you can actually provide a net sink of carbon dioxide because the plant is grabbing carbon dioxide out of the air. Some of it goes back in the form of carbon dioxide when you burn it, but you're actually capturing a lot of carbon dioxide. If you can get sequestration to work, which, with all due respect, I think there's a reasonable chance, then it becomes a net sink. And so there are proposals out of getting also hybrid plants, so coal with biomaterial to liquids, capture the excess carbon dioxide, and it could be a hybrid plant in the sense that you can also use it to generate electricity. And so I think Professor Bob Williams at Princeton is one of the major proponents of this. I know that Dow Chemical is looking at this as because their, Dow Chemical is essentially a carbon company. They buy forms of carbon in the form of, for example, natural gas and petroleum, and turn it to other forms of carbon, namely plastic. And so if they could get bio waste or even coal as their feedstock, that would be a nice thing to do. And if it can be captured, and you can capture the carbon and sequester it economically, then it's clean in the process. So I think those are things that I'm actually personally looking into to see if they have a ghost of a chance of working.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Secretary, again, we have done the study as far as on the carbon sequestration and found numerous oil wells that, as you alluded to earlier, are somewhere between half and three-fourths still with oil content that could be replaced, and we can pump the carbon to them. The next issue we stumble with then becomes the loan guarantee program. It's just so much more prohibitive to a clean coal technology versus one that would not be. Do you have any thoughts on that? I realized earlier you said about the risk is directly related to it.
That's right. I mean, the risks of, again, if it's If it's a technology that hasn't been tried before, there's a great deal of risk to that, and so then it's scored much more seriously, and then we have a certain amount of money we can use to guarantee the loans, because you're expecting certain losses, and so that's the issue. We make fewer loans if the riskier it is.
Well, when you look at the grand scheme of things and with the way nuclear is doubling in price and continuing to go forward, I really hope that the department will look at what the opportunities are with using coal, and investing in it may be much less expensive than going to continue with the nuclear. And as the chairman said recently, we still wind up with the rods at the end of the time. And so what do we do? I mean, how do we move forward if we have a mentality that keeps us from moving forward with coal, clean coal?
Well, it again goes back to the fundamental question: can we develop methods of capturing the carbon? And so most of the cost is in actually the capture. It's not in the storage. The storage and monitoring. I know a couple of my personal friends who are experts in this, and we have been doing experiments, a couple of million tons a year in various sites around the world. And the Department of Energy is sponsoring more in the sequestration part, whether it can be done safely, adequately monitored. But it's the capture part that's the real cost. And we've got to figure out ways of doing that better.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. What we've all been waiting for, Mr. Robacher is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and happy St. Patrick's Day to us all. And Mr. Secretary, it really is refreshing to hear your testimony today, and I look forward to working with you in the years ahead, and I'm very pleased with your appointment to this important position. But let me not disappoint my chairman by noting that it has now been 7 years since there's been any warming recorded on the planet. That's why I guess people have changed the wording to now it's not global warming, now it's, something to do with climate change. There are prominent scientists, more and more prominent scientists every day, joining the ranks of those who are suggesting that the whole global warming theory is bogus. And I would add 10 names of prominent scientists, which I will at every one of our hearings, who are now joining the ranks, prominent scientists, heads of major universities, science departments from throughout the world. And I will now submit a list of 10 of those names for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Thus, cap and trade and carbon sequestration are wastes of money. They are aimed at the global warming theory. However, your efforts for energy self-sufficiency and protecting the health of human beings by having cleaner fuels is certainly appreciated here, and I will be very happy to work with you on those areas in the future. Let me note for a couple of examples, I would draw your attention to the work done at the University of California at Davis, which is aimed at biotech and the production of energy in that way. I would also call your attention, and again, I very much appreciate your openness to nuclear energy, and I would suggest that one way we can have cooperation internationally, cut down the cost of getting to the point where nuclear energy is brought back online, is the development of the high-temperature gas-cooled reactor, which lends itself to cooperation with the Russians and gets rid of a lot of the problems we talked about, including the Yucca Mountain problem. In fact, there'd be less waste stored at Yucca Mountain if we use high-temperature gas-cooled reactors. And finally, let me mention to you and draw your attention to a report that I have here, which is a report that suggests that space-based solar power could be brought to service in a very cost-effective way. We could use it to provide energy to third world countries without having to build huge plants in those third world countries. We could provide energy for our military in emergency situations. And I might suggest that this committee would be able to work with you, because we do also oversee NASA, and it would also be an area of great international cooperation, again with the Russians, to build space solar power units that could provide clean electricity for the world. Those are just a few thoughts, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on space solar power and the high-temperature gas-cooled reactor.
With space-based solar power, I know, I think it's Marty Holford who's a big fan of this. I'll be frank, I'm a little bit skeptical. Anything you put up in space costs a lot of money.
You know, the Russians have cheap ways of getting things into space. We should be trying to develop our own cheap ways of getting into space. What about the high-temperature gas-cooled reactors?
High-temperature gas-cooled reactors is something we should and will be looking into, because it also, if they're really high temperature, it opens up the possibility of generating hydrogen.
Right.
And the hydrogen is like a battery, quite frankly.
There is a high-temperature gas-cooled reactor, the only one I know functioning in Japan.
Right.
I visited that facility, would suggest that it really offers a lot of promise. One last thing, there are a lot of other ideas that offer great promise to producing clean electricity. And I might add, again, I could care less about, I believe the global warming theory is bogus, but clean energy to protect people's health and to provide energy self-sufficiency is a great goal, which you can count on cooperation from all of us. There are things developed, and just one last concept. There is a fellow out in California, Mr. Chairman, that has a paint that's based on nanotechnology. I've been encouraging this company in this development that will make houses into solar collectors, which are much more efficient even than photovoltaic cells. Have you heard about this?
Well, we'll have to hear about it later, if that's
Thank
okay.
you.
Mr. Robacher, you never disappoint. Thank you for being here. Let me, if I could, maybe lay out some rules of the road for the rest of the hearing if no one has an objection. We had told the Secretary that he could be able to get out by noon. We're going to impose upon him to stay another 15 minutes to a quarter after. So we want to try to be crisp. Unfortunately, I have another obligation, and Mr. Wu is going to take over here. Let me just say, Mr. Secretary, again, thank you for being here. At first view, someone might not think that you're all that exciting, but this has been a very exciting hearing and an exciting topic, and it's going to be fun moving forward with you. And Mr. Lipinski is recognized, and Mr. Wu, if you would.
Is this microphone working? It's working, isn't it?
Yeah.
This one's working. All right. I'll try to stay away from my. I want to get up and start wandering around now I have this microphone. But let me say, Dr. Chu, or I'm trying to figure this out. People talking Dr. Chu or Mr. Secretary. I think maybe Dr. Secretary. I don't know if that's the correct way to refer to you. But I was excited when you were nominated to be the Secretary of Energy. I know that a couple years ago, I think it was about 2 years ago, I sat down with you at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, came to visit, and we had lunch. And at that time, I was very impressed by, obviously with the Nobel, your knowledge of your field is great. But on top of that, much more importantly, especially in this job, is your ability to really very fluently discuss and understand and deal with the policy. So I was excited. Let me say I was excited when you were named the Secretary of Energy. I wanted to bring up something that we had talked about, something we had talked about during that lunch and was brought up earlier, was the Energy Biosciences Institute collaboration between LBL, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and BP. I think that these are, this integration of the national labs, universities, and industry are very critical. I know you feel the same way. And in your confirmation hearing, you say that DOE will better integrate national lab, university, and industry research. So I wanted to throw a general question out to you about what specifically do you want to do at DOE? What do you want to see DOE do differently, maybe, including funding initiatives or models, in order to make this collaboration really work well? And let me throw this other question out there while we're on this issue. We want to integrate universities and labs along with industry, but what about do you see any problems, any real competition to some extent between universities and the labs? Because that's also an issue that sometimes does come up. But I'm just interested in what you would like to see and what your plans are at DOE for this help this collaboration.
Well, in terms of the integration, the further integration of industry with universities and with national labs, I would like to see consortia of companies or individual companies actually work with scientists at these universities, actually develop the intellectual property together. That goes a long way. So very, very quick story. I was asked to go and give a dedicating speech for Dow Chemical in Midlands. And so I flew over there, gave a speech, talked to the Chief Technology Officer, CEO, and others. And then they came over to Lawrence Berkeley Lab. We decided we had a lot in common, so they came over and chatted a little bit more and said, well, look, this is no good if I just talking to the Chief Technology Officer. We've got to get our scientists and engineers to talk to each other. So the next time they came over, we had a one-day thing where the scientists and engineers from Dow would talk about, there were 4 talks, and they talked about their projects, and the people in the University of California, Berkeley, and Berkeley Lab, which is very integrated, actually. Roughly 270 of our scientists are professors at UC, listened and said, so the intent was, this is what Dow is interested in developing. Do we have some knowledge that can help them? And to make a long story short, one of the chemists at Dow said, while we like to make water-soluble products, we don't want the water in our processes because water absorbs a lot of heat. It undergoes phase changes. All that loses energy, and we're trying to drive out the energy costs. So we actually don't want our processes to use water because you've got to recycle the water anyway. You can't just dump it out, and so we'd rather use organic liquids. So I leaned over to one of our chemists. Did you know that? You don't want water in a process? No. And how would they? They go to the sink, they turn a tap, water comes out free. So when we start, or when people in universities start to do research, again, it goes back to manufacturability, it goes back to industrial processes. Industry actually knows a lot more about those things. And so rather than go down a line and develop intellectual property that ends up being not very practical and from an industrial point of view, let's get them together early. And so this is what I mean by industrial collaboration. We were working on industrial collaboration with United Technologies to try to put together a consortium of companies that pre-IP, this is pre-competitive research that all companies could use for building efficiencies that could work with a Berkeley Lab and with UC Berkeley, again, with the same idea in mind. So it's things like that I think we can have the opportunity to work on.
Thank you, and I look forward to working with you. I also want to, I won't do it now, but at sometime near future, I'd like to talk to you about the Advanced Battery Manufacturing Program funded in the American Recovery Act. And as I look forward to working with you, and even though you did go from Stanford to Berkeley, I won't hold that against you. Yes, I was a Stanford grad.
Well, it was, I have loyalties in both institutions, as you must know, deep loyalties in both.
Divided loyalties. Dr. Chu, let me assure you that I find you very exciting. Next, the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. Brown. And let me just mention to members that although you have the absolute ability to take your full 5 minutes, if you want to consider your fellow members and take 2 or 3 minutes instead, then we'll be able to get through all of the folks who are asking questions by 12:15. Dr. Brown, please proceed.
Dr. Secretary, do you realize that there's absolutely no, in fact, zero consensus in the scientific community about human-induced global warming?
No, I don't. I beg to differ, actually.
Well, you're absolutely dead wrong, Mr. Secretary. There's a tremendous number of scientists who would absolutely debunk any human causes of global warming. And I think just for scientific integrity, I ask that you go and look at those things because there is no consensus. Are you and this administration absolutely determined to shut down the U.S. economy, to put people out of work, markedly raise the prices of food, medication, all goods and services, which will particularly hurt people on limited income and the poor, to pursue a policy, this cap and trade, I call it cap and tax policy, that is not only questionable scientifically, but in fact has been shown scientifically that human activity and carbon dioxide release has very minimal, if any at all, significant effects on global warming. Are y'all so determined that you're going to shut down the economy and hurt these folks to pursue this kind of policy?
Well, the primary goal in this administration, first and foremost, is to get the economy going again. That the unemployment rates of exceeding 8% are very, very scary. The shutdown of the credit markets, all these things are very, very scary. I mean, 1 out of 12 Americans is now out of work. And so, first and foremost, we need to restart the economy because there is a lot of pain out there. Now, given that, I don't think, seriously do not, again, disagree that what we're trying to do in the Economic Recovery Act is to start to build the United States towards more energy independence, towards much more efficient use of energy and developing new sources of energy, rebuilding and addition to the transmission and distribution infrastructure. All of those things are also increasing the investments that will help the economy restart. And in addition to that, it helps in the overall goals of our economic prosperity, our working towards foreign oil dependency, decreasing that and getting off the dependency, and the environmental issues. We do apparently have fundamental disagreements on what the science is saying. Let me just say in terms of that science is a very very peculiar sort of thing in that if a scientist comes along and disproves what most of the scientists think and turns out to be right, that scientist is actually hailed as a hero. I mean, that's the fundamental structure of science. Einstein comes along and says Newton was pretty good, but he got some things wrong in certain areas, very high velocities, for example, or high gravitation. He's a hero. People who develop quantum mechanics, similarly, they overthrew the prevailing view, and they get Nobel Prizes for that. So the protection of science and the truth will out in the end is because of that fundamental issue. And so yes, if scientists come forward and show that this is all wrong, they will be heroes. And so people are constantly checking and doing things. But again, when I started to look into this maybe 6, 8 years ago and started as an amateur but read more and more about it, I became more and more convinced that these are very real issues.
Well, sir, I'm a physician, I'm a scientist, and I'm an applied scientist, and I believe in scientific integrity. And if you'll look at a lot of other writings that are peer-reviewed, there are many sources of data that show that human-induced global warming is a myth. And I request that you take off your blinders and bias and look, because there are many, many scientists who would debunk this whole idea, and it's going to kill our economy, and it's going to particularly hurt poor people and people on limited incomes. And to go down this track, it's going to kill our economy. We're spending too much, we're taxing too much, we're borrowing too much, and we've just got to stop it. I think everybody on this committee, everybody in Congress wants to see the economy going again. But going down this track of cap and trade cap and tax is the wrong way to go. Thank you, sir.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Chandler.
Mr. Secretary, congratulations to you, and best regards from your friend Lynn Peters back in Kentucky. I would like for you, if you could, to talk a little bit about electric cars. Do you believe that they are indeed the future of our personal transportation system? And could you give us a little bit of a timeline on the development of them, development of batteries, development of distribution system, et cetera? Thank you.
Okay, very quickly, yes, I think electric cars have great promise because most people, you know, they're not going to work for long distance trucking. They're not going to work for long distance transportation, but most Americans, I've understood, travel typically 40 miles or less, 50 miles or less per day to and from work. And so if you can get electric vehicles that have a range of 40, 80 miles with some backup, or that could offload a lot of the oil we import, a significant amount of it, and give us more options for generating electricity. It also, by the way, allows a dual use in that if you have solar panels on your roof, as an example, you can charge up your battery of your car. It allows you to buy energy at nighttime when it's very inexpensive. There's excess capacity, and use that. And so the investments in power generation. So there's a lot of very good things about electric vehicles. You put your finger right on the nub of the issue, the battery. All the other parts we know how to do very well. And right now we don't have batteries that can survive deep discharges. But you know, the Prius battery is held between 40 and 60% of full charge the entire lifetime of the battery, and usually actually much tighter for most of it, 55 to 45%. Because if you deep discharge a battery, we know, we do the experiment on our laptop computers. After a couple of years of deep discharges, guess what? It's holding half the energy. And that's bad because right now the cost of batteries is quite high as well. You know, the estimates of, for example, in the Chevy Volt, that battery that gives you that 40-mile range will be of scale $10,000, $12,000. So that battery is a significant part of the total cost of that car, and it better last the lifetime of the car. So now, the good news is I know of some battery research that has promise. It's not, there's great opportunities once you know, in a former life before I took this job, I was actually on the scientific board of a battery startup company. And there are certain areas which actually have incredible amount of progress that can be made. Batteries that could be inherently much safer, safer in the sense that they won't go in these very high temperature fires. This particular company developed an electrolyte that's to allow the ions, the lithium ions, to go across that is inherently non-flammable. If you can create a much safer battery, that also will drive down manufacturing costs a great deal, because it's the very tight manufacturing tolerances of our current lithium-ion technology that drive the cost way up. The materials, the cobalt that's used on the cathode side, we need to substitute. There are real opportunities in batteries that I see that could give you this factor of 2 or 3 in energy density and make it much less flammable. That means you ease up on this, the very tight manufacturing tolerances will drive down the cost as well. So I'm actually hopeful, but you know, you're asking me to predict when this new generation battery will occur. All I can say is, again, going back to this other view that batteries is a big deal, not only for cars, but for large-scale energy storage, for residential storage, for building storage, because if we can get the batteries, and going to your point, Representative Ehlers, that this is, there are a lot of applications for batteries. Even to level out the transients when clouds roll over a solar farm or the wind stutters a little bit, you actually need batteries. So many, many applications. And one of the things I would like to do is not only to invest in batteries for cars, but batteries for all these other applications.
Of oil and helping the economy, as you mentioned, particularly helping the economy is essential to any policy that we pursue. I want to talk a little bit about cap and trade as is in the President's proposed budget, or as Mr. Brown referred it to as cap and tax. I want to throw some facts out there that a number of different groups have put out, and I think there's pretty much a consensus. Many, including the EPA and many others, estimate that it would be a decline in GDP if cap and tax is implemented. A number of groups estimate that it would be a loss of millions of jobs. And again, a number of different groups. Just about everyone understands, and there's a consensus that cap and tax or cap and trade will increase electricity rates. You mentioned that yourself a little while ago on American families and American businesses by anywhere between 44 to 129%, which, by the way, is way above what the President is proposing to subsidize some families in his budget. So they're way above that. Gasoline price increases between 61 cents to $2.53 per gallon. Natural gas cost increases between 108% and 146%. To sum it up best, you know, you're the President's own OMB director, who used to be at CBL, stated September 18th, quote, costs will be passed along to the consumers in the form of higher prices for energy. I don't think that's debatable. Again, that's Mr. Orszag. He also stated that a 15% cut in CO2 emissions, which, by the way, is 80% less than is sought in the President's budget, would be an average annual household cost of $1,300. These are substantial numbers. So these are some of the facts. Now, you stated in your testimony in answering the questions, by the way, which I think you're right, that the U.S., by the way, can't do this alone. Obviously, China being the big 800-pound gorilla as far as CO2 emissions. Associated Press today has an article where they quoted the Chinese Director of Climate Change, the Department of Climate Change, saying that China will not be charged for that, that the U.S. importers of products made in China that produce high CO2s are going to have to pay the cost, in essence. So look, in essence, like you mentioned, you know, that it's cool to, it's good to be cool to be energy efficient. Clearly, quoting another one of those sayings, China just said no. One more time. This is the same China that just recently harassed the U.S. military ship, the same China that murders dissenters. We know who we're dealing with. So here's the question. That being the case, and you said that, you stated in other words, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that obviously we can't do it alone, China being the big player. Will this administration then change the policy regarding cap and trade or cap and tax, or will it go forward regardless of those facts on how it will impact the economy, and particularly if China says, nope, you know, we're not going to play, and how will policy be guided by the costs on the U.S. economy and the U.S. family, regardless, because again, as I said, that partial subsidy just won't cut it. The numbers are there. They're pretty plain. So will this administration, and will you look at all those facts, and are you willing then to take a step back and say, we're not going to do this because the price is too high, the economic price is too high, and China just won't play?
Well,
China and others, I guess, too. And not only China. I guess China is the big one, but there are a lot of others that.
Well, there are two actually 800-pound gorillas when it comes to carbon emissions. It's China and the U.S. I think the two countries together, China's recently passed the United States, but those two countries emit approximately half of all the carbon in the world. I'm not, I don't, you know, my understanding of the numbers of the costs are far less. I do know the IPC and also IPCC in the latest report, and also the Stern review report that Nicholas Stern chaired. Those two reports estimate in order to hold carbon emissions down to a level which the climate scientists feel is prudent risk management is somewhere between 1% and 2% of GDP. Now, the cost of 1 or 2% of GDP is not insignificant by a long shot. That's a lot of money. But then you have to weigh that against what could possibly happen if we did business as usual. And so then it becomes an issue of what those the potential risks could be. And while one can't say with 100% certainty that such and such will happen, it's again talking about probabilities.
I'm sorry, sir, but you do know, but we can say with certainty the cost of the economy. I mean, that we can say.
That's true.
Okay.
So this is a risk management in the following sense. One can't say with certainty that your house will burn down. In fact, in most cases, your house does not burn down, and yet we all have fire insurance because it's part of that. Because should disaster strike, it's very important. So if let's pretend there's let's say an 80% certainty that the western part of the United States will lose a lot of its pine forests, and there would be less storage of less snowpack, therefore less storage of water. The economic cost of that could be much higher. Would be much higher, and so it's not 99% certain, but say it's 80% certain. Then we as a country will have to decide whether we want to pay this extra money, and it is real money to invest. And so that's really the issue that
But again, how about the issue of China saying no?
China saying no to what?
To them paying for, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, they're basically saying no, the United States has to pay for our emissions
I think
costs.
It's very important that all countries, developing countries and developed countries, start to limit their carbon.
But if they say no, do we continue to pursue this policy or do we not?
I think I'm actually optimistic that China, because China realizes that the consequences of climate change are very real to their country as well. The economic
But
cost.
if they say no, that's my question.
We talked about in terms of international trade of adjusting duties as a way, okay? Because again, we don't want to disadvantage our industries at home.
I thank the gentleman and the secretary. We are running hard up against Chairman Gordon's 12:15. I do want to give Mr. Tonko his 5 minutes, but if he would proceed quickly, and if it's possible for the other three members who are here to ask something quickly with the secretary's forbearance. Thank
Sure.
you. Mr. Tonko, gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Secretary Chu, thank you for joining us today. I do believe that President Obama expressed great leadership when he nominated you to be Secretary, and I'm empowered for all energy consumers by your appointment. I share the vision that President Obama and you have etched for this nation in terms of innovation as it relates to energy. And I particularly appreciate the boldness with which you've expressed that vision and the laser-sharp focus. I appreciate the research and development impacts that you think we need to continue and deepen, and certainly want to express a concern for energy efficiency so that we can focus on demand-side solutions rather than just supply side. Quick question on the advanced battery technology of which you spoke, and rightfully for transportation sectors and for energy generation and other aspects. What is your thinking in terms of diversifying that sort of battery technology? Should we go down the path of one type of battery, or should we make it the mission of your agency to encourage diversification amongst battery technologies?
Definitely diversification, and we intend to fund what we think are the most promising ideas. No, we don't want the whole world marching towards, incremental improvements of a specific technology. Absolutely, we want, and so again, it actually goes to the issue of different types of batteries for different uses as well.
Thank you. And also with energy efficiency, I served as chair of the Energy Committee in the New York State Assembly for 15 years, and then went on to become president and CEO of NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. All of the work we've done in efficiency, not just for manufacturing, but for businesses of all kinds, for dairy farms, were tremendously powerful statements that reduce the demand. We are, per capita, one of the most gluttonous societies in terms of fossil fuel consumption. The efficiency in the stimulus package is encouraging, but I know it's a function of resources. We need much more. What are your thoughts on how we can best advance the efficiency agenda?
I think part of it is helping people realize just how low-hanging this fruit really is, or as I'd like to say, it's fruit on the ground, ready to be picked up. Let me just give you one example. Refrigerator standards and the energy efficiency of refrigerators from 1975 till today, the energy consumption in the refrigerator, even though the size went up, went down to only 25% of the refrigerators of 1975. Had we been using those inefficient refrigerators of 1975 today, we would be using a lot more energy. How much more energy than all the renewables that we produce today?
Thank you. Just a final comment. I would encourage us to strongly focus on developing resources for energy retrofits, efficiency retrofits for our workplaces and our homes. But thank you very much for your leadership.
I should have known better than to expect public servants and a professor to be brief. The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Inglis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Quickly, please.
Dr. Secretary, thank you for your service. You know, I wonder if even we could stipulate to the climate, the folks that say there's no climate change, even if that's true, perhaps we could get them to come along and try to break the addiction to oil and to create the jobs of the future by doing what they know or will soon find out, I think, has to be done, which you have to internalize the externals associated with some fuels that we use. And if you do that, then we unleash the power of the marketplace to do what those who we've heard from today who don't think there's any climate change nevertheless want to do, which is see the private sector succeed. I wonder if the best way to do it, though, is not by cap and trade, which we've already heard tagged as a tax increase, and a system that will trade credits when Wall Street is not very favored right now. And it got 48 votes for cloture in the Senate before all of that, before a recession and before the Wall Street disasters. I wonder if a revenue-neutral carbon tax that's transparent, that starts with a reduction of taxes in payroll, creates no additional take to the government, and that does what you very wisely pointed out, has a border adjustment so that we don't disadvantage American manufacturing vis-a-vis other manufacturers. I wonder if that's our collaboration opportunity to go forward to a solution for America, even with folks who doubt the underlying premise of climate change. Do you think it's possible?
Well, I think the administration is very strongly going towards cap and trade and supports cap and trade. There are other issues for wanting to do that. Let me just say that Europe is going this way, and so whatever we do, we have to interface with the rest of the world community, and to make these programs look similar. And so, but it as you correctly said, it is about incorporating all the external costs of our energy into the product we buy. Just as when we decided we're going to treat sewage, does it increase the cost of water? Yeah, absolutely. But the overall cost actually goes down because the consequences of putting untreated sewage in a river downstream are much, much higher than just treating the sewage. It's also true of sulfur dioxide, that it does increase the costs, but it doesn't really. It puts the costs actually where it should be in the product itself. And so I think we're in total agreement. But you know, I think cap and trade has the advantage at least one advantage, in that it's easier to interface to where the rest of the world is going.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, 2 minutes each for the last two questioners, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I'll take that long. Mr. Secretary, it's an honor to be here with you today as well. I recently extended an invitation to visit Los Alamos National Laboratories, and I hope that we can begin to engage in a dialogue on when we can get you out there to really highlight some of the areas where there is research taking place in Los Alamos in the areas of sciences with global climate change, supercapacitor energy storage, hydrogen fuel cell technology, and carbon sequestration. What I want to emphasize, Mr. Secretary, is the reason that we're here today, which is with the emphasis of this committee hearing is in the new direction for energy research and development for the U.S. Department of Energy. And applaud the efforts of yourself and the administration and the team that's been put together that has embraced science and technology, not to, for any other reason, use science and technology to prevent progress, but to encourage progress, to advance job creation, not eliminate jobs opportunities as we move forward in the economy and the economic conditions that we're facing as a nation. Mr. Chairman, I'll submit my question specifically to the Secretary for consideration later. But Mr. Secretary, we're at a critical time right now. And with your courage and based on science and technological advances, the work that can be done to get us on a right footing and to make sure that this nation has a foundation in order to become a leader in the world before others will follow is something that I really appreciate, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Grayson.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we had commercial fusion power today, we'd have energy independence, we would reduce or eliminate oil imports, and we'd have no CO2 emissions at all from that particular source of power. Now, in the case of fission, we went from military applications to commercial energy applications in less than 10 years. In the case of fusion, we've had military applications for over 50 years, and we're still waiting for those commercial applications, despite 50 years' worth of effort. We've lost our lead in fusion research to the European Union, and now we're number 2 at best in an area that's bound to be an important part of the 21st century economy. And I'm wondering if the reason is simply money. I understand it's been estimated that $100 billion would be enough to develop the commercial application of fusion energy and to free our economy from dependence on Mideast oil. $100 billion is less than we spent on the AIG bailout. It's less than 1 year of the cost of the war in Iraq. And if that were the case, then we'd be free for all time. I'm wondering, Mr. Secretary, do you favor a Manhattan Project-style approach to this problem that would dramatically increase our spending on fusion energy in order to make us energy independent?
I support a Manhattan-style investment of this country and the world in all the parts of energy supply and demand that can reduce, so that we can, as a world, transition to sustainable use of energy. Fusion is a difficult question because it is a very long time scale. They're very hard problems, and I think dramatically increasing the budget for fusion. Right now, the ITER project has a path to go. It's still an experiment, and ultimately, even if ITER works very, very well, there would be then, as anticipated, a so-called demo style type of thing, still a pre-deployment thing, but getting on the way to there. And the time scale for that is sort of mid-century. And it depends on ultimately the cost of fusion. If we can get fusion's cost down, that's the real issue. First, we have to show that you can get more than break-even, that it really is going to give a lot of yield. There are other prospects that one should be looking at, I think, and that is these so-called hybrid solutions of fission and fusion. The fusion creates the high-energy neutrons that are used to convert a lot of the radioactive fuel and burn down the long-lived radioactive isotopes, and so there are prospects like that. But ultimately, there's a timeline. If we increase the funding by a factor 10, will we get there 10 times faster? I actually think not. That it's a very, very hard nut to crack in terms of getting the controlled, sustainable fusion that we need, and it has to be economically viable. And so we're not there yet in terms of even, so I'm all for continuing to do research in fusion. I'm all for looking at, out of left field, new ways of doing fusion. I mean, the ITER project, the tokamak style thing is one possibility. The path for that has now been charted, and the world is following that. But there may be other opportunities.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank the Secretary. And before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank Dr. Chu for testifying before the committee today. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for answers to any follow-up questions the committee may ask of the witness. The witness is excused, and the hearing is now adjourned.